Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is my post-fight reaction to Brian Norman actually not even stopping, knocking out Jin Sasaki in the fifth round. Boy, oh boy, that was a brutal ass knockout, man. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, Brian Norman, like, he impressed me, bro. Like, he impressed me because it's just like because Jin Sasaki, he tried his best, man. You know, it's like he gave the test to Brian Norman of what he was supposed to deliver. But it was a matter of time until Brian Norman's power was gonna generate like that. I always knew that Brian Norman has power like that. But if he knocks out a Japanese fighter like that, you know, like evidently this dude got like some serious power, you know, and shit like that, you know, like I'm just saying though, and shit like that. You know, that early, like, I'm just saying, like, do you really? It just, I know Jaron Ennis would have got Sasaki out of there, but do you really think he would have got him out of there in the fifth round? I mean, he could have, but in my opinion, I think he would have took him a little bit more work for Jaron to get Jin Sasaki out of there, you know, and shit like that, you know. Brian Norman, he did that shit, you know, and shit like that, you know. And that's the thing and shit like that, you know. But, you know, Jin Sasaki's a good fighter, man. Like, he still proved his case scenario that he still is a tough fighter. You know, he showed that he can still pop with his punches. He still shows that he has speed and he can throw a lot of punches. But it's just more of like, he has no defense. He can't defend any punches at all. You know, and shit like that. You know, like, every single punch that Brian Norman threw, like, was extremely effective to Jin Sasaki. You know, and shit like that, you know. But what a win, man. What a fucking win for Brian Norman, you know, and stuff like that, you know. And he's stepping closer and closer and closer to fighting Jerome Butenis, you know, and shit like that. Overall, I feel like after this fight, I feel like that really proves that he can fight Jerome Ennis. But I can understand why they want, you know, why, like, you know, he's probably not gonna fight Jaron Ennis next, because, you know, that's a really good fight right there, and more, and but they both are kind of on the same level, so it's just like, I just don't know, man. I would really like to see that fight happen first. But I mean, there is Andy Hiroka, you know, and shit like that, you know. And because I believe Andy Hiroka's in the welterweight division, you know, and shit like that, you know. So, like, that's the thing. So I mean, I feel like that would be a good fight. But I feel like if that fight does happen, he's gonna have to literally just have an Airbnb in Japan, because he's literally just gonna have to fly right back to Japan, because the most money is gonna be, you know, is over in Japan for Brian Norman when it comes down to, you know, fighting Japanese fighters, you know, and shit like that, you know. And that's the thing and stuff like that, you know. Like, well, Andy Hiroka's Japanese. Let me go look. Let me go look. Yes, Andy Hiroka is from Japan, you know, and stuff like that, you know. But basically, yeah, you know, and shit like that, you know. So it's like he's gonna have to, like, go back to Japan if he wants to fight Andy Hiroka, you know, and stuff like that, you know, because, you know, Brian Norman, like, is a money man, and it's more of like he's gonna do anything of what he's gonna do so he can be able to get more of that extra pay, you know, and stuff like that, you know. And he's gonna go over to, you know, and overall, like, if he wants to fight Hiroka with that kind of money, he's gonna have to go over to Japan. But overall, like, I feel like he's gonna get a good amount of money over in Japan if he goes and fights Andy Hiroka, you know, and shit like that, you know. And that's the thing and shit like that, you know. But yeah, man, you know, and shit like that, you know. What a win, man. You know, like, I thought this fight was gonna be a lot more competitive than what it was, you know, and shit like that, you know. But I mean, I don't really think it's Jin Sasaki's fault, realistically. Like, I feel like honestly, it's me, you know, and people who underestimated, you know, Brian Norman's fault, because overall, the people who truly know like, because I truly do know the skill set, but the people who really gave him the credit is the people who actually knew who, like, you know, how he was gonna actually do in this fight, you know, and shit like that, you know, because the person who commented, you know, and shit like that, you know, who said, like, you know, that, not on my video, but it was on another video, who commented that Brian Norman is way too strong for Jin Sasaki. You, my brother or sister, you are 100% right, you know, and shit like that, you know, and I was wrong, you know, and shit like that, you know. It's because both of these fighters have power, and you know, and Sasaki, he's a Japanese fighter, and a lot of Japanese fighters are known to have a really good chin, and Sasaki throws a lot of punches, you know, and stuff like that, you know, and, you know, overall, going against a guy like Norman, I would think that that would give him some problems, you know, and shit like that, but Norman stepped up his game. Like I said before, he's a very crafty and smart fighter that knows how to adjust on different fights, you know, and shit like that, but boy, oh boy, he adjusted better than I thought in this fight, because I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a test when he's readjusting, you know, and shit like that, to the punch output and the power of Jin Sasaki. But that was Sasaki who had to worry about that, because every one punch was devastating for for Brian Norman, you know, and stuff like that. You know, every single punch was devastating for him, you know, and shit like that, you know. So it's like, once he let his hands go, that's where just, you know, Sasaki would just get leveled to the canvas, because he got knocked down he got knocked out, but before that, he got knocked down 2 times, you know, and shit like that. But overall, he got knocked down 3 times. So that was like, but those 2 knockdowns, that's what I'm saying. Once, you know, Norman let his hands go, that's when he dropped Sasaki. But he tricked Sasaki with the left hand, because if you see on the replays all night, like, and if you see the fight, you know, Norman was just hitting Sasaki, you know, and shit like that with his right hand all night, you know, and shit like that. He was able to hit Sasaki however he wanted to, you know, and shit like that. I think it's Sasaki, or I think it's Sasaki, but he was hitting Sasaki however he fucking wanted to hit him. But it's just, you know, but the main agenda was that he was hitting him with his right hand. And then after that, when Sasaki wanted to, like, he didn't even come forward. He more just kind of like lunged a little bit into Brian Norman's range, and then Norman just knew the distance very well, and he realized it like really, really fast, you know, and shit like that, you know. And then that's when, you know, he, you know, caught, Jin Sasaki with the left hand, and it was a brutal left fucking hand, and it dropped him, or knocked him out, you know, and shit. And I was honestly really nervous for Jin Sasaki, you know, and shit like that, because I didn't even know, you know, because I didn't even see that boy breathe at all. Like, I swear that boy wasn't breathing for a good 10 seconds. But then he started breathing, like, and he got put on the stretcher. Like, I really pray for this dude, man. You know, I really do pray for Sasaki, because it just, you know, like, I don't like to see that with fighters. You know, I know I should have made this more before, you know, and shit like that, you know. So if people get frustrated because I'm showing the photo and then also not showing condolences very quick, I do apologize. You just, you know, I have a pattern of how I say things, and sometimes, you know, I need, like, but that's the thing and shit like that, you know. But prayers up to Jin Sasaki, man. He's a tough fucking fighter. He's a warrior. He stepped in there with Brian Norman Jr. And overall, man, if you step in there, man, you're a fucking warrior. But overall and shit like that, I'm gonna go and go to the next clip. But before that, I'm gonna go and roll me my my steamer, and then yeah. But yeah, man, what a win for Brian Norman, man. What a fucking win for Brian Norman. And overall, like, it's just, again, like, he really impressed me with this win, man. It's just, like, very much so. Like, I knew he had it in him. and shit like that, because he would show that, like even in the fucking in the damn Santion fight and shit like that, where Santion, like, all he's gonna do is just press forward and shit like that. He utilized, good skill, good defense, and shit like that. Like, he, like, obviously he got hit a bit because Santion, like, he's, at the end of the day, Santion's still a good fighter, and shit like that. But he still managed to utilize good defense, and shit like that, a little bit mixed with his offense, and shit like that, But overall and shit like that, it's like, like, I just, I'm not gonna lie, like, I feel like Norman's offense and his power is good enough, man. It's like, either way, like, he can touch up on his defense, but he's already stepping up in the ranks. And he's already, obviously he's a champion, he's a WBO champion and shit like that, but it's just, I'm just saying, like to everybody, like the whole boxing community, it's like he's really stepping up there, and shit like that, so it's like he's gonna have to really fight these tough ass competition, and shit like that, but overall, the two fights that I see him fighting is either gonna be Ennis or Andy Hiroka. But I don't think it's gonna be Ennis though, because overall I kind of fell asleep before, like, but like, and I didn't really hear, Brian Norman talk much but like, people are saying that, but that he was targeting Andy Hiroka and shit like that, and stuff, but like, but it's just, he was literally calling out Ennis before. But it's just, what if he's seen what Ennis was about, though? That's the one thing. What if he's seen what Ennis was about, and shit like that, because what if he didn't know that Ennis was gonna really hurt and stop, what's his name and shit like that? Who did Jaron Ennis fight before? It was, fuck, what's his name? Oh my gosh, hold on. Imantas Stanionis, and shit like that, like, that's what he fought, Imantas Stanionis, and shit like that, and basically and shit like that, it's like, what if Norman didn't know what, Ennis was about in that fight, and shit like that, but either way, like knowing Norman's skill set, I don't think he would be necessarily scared of, of Jaron Ennis, but I think he's more like respective now of Jaron Ennis, and shit like that, because the reason why is because he probably was thinking that Stanionis was gonna press the action, it was gonna make it a really tough fight, kind of like how Norman would make it with Jaron Ennis, but then he's seen how Stanionis just got beat up, and shit like that, because I'm pretty sure he's seen that fight, and shit like that, and Ennis's fight was more recent than Brian Norman's fight, and shit like that, so that's the thing and shit like that, so what if he was like, okay, and then that's why he didn't want to reference that's why he didn't want to reference, Jaron Ennis's name yet, because, he doesn't want to take that L yet like that, because he probably really thought that he was going to be able to knock out Jaron Ennis like that, but then he's seen of how tough it might be, because Ennis got a good chin, man, like, even though he could get buckled a few times with shots, but at the end of the day, it's like, he could take punches, man, and shit like that, I feel like he could take more better shots than Brian Norman, in my opinion, and shit like that, because Brian Norman, like, I want to see more fight, and shit like that, but off of right now, I feel like Brian Norman, if he gets really hit with a shot, one good shot, he could go night-night real quickly, and shit like that, but that's the thing and shit like that, but I just say though and shit like that, because he been wanting to fight, Jaron Ennis for this long, but then I just feel like he sort of ducked him. I don't know. It could be just money involved. It could be different things, because he probably could seen how in Japan he can make good money in Japan, and shit like that, And again, Andy Hiroka, he is a tough ass fighter, and shit like that, And Andy Hiroka, he is undefeated. Let me go look. Yes, Andy Hiroka is undefeated. 24-0 with 19 knockouts. Stuff like that. He is an undefeated fighter. And shit like that. And I do that. I just wanted to fully make sure. But, You know, because I do that sometimes just to make sure, you know, and shit like that. But that's the thing and shit like that, man. You know, like, you know, that's a very, very, very good fight for Brian Norman. And overall, like, I feel like stylistically, it's more of a better opportunity, you know, for him to win at least, you know, against Hiroka than Ennis. But at the same time, it's just, at the end of the day, I feel like it's still kind of a duck, you know, and shit like that. Like, I really do feel like he's seen what Ennis was about, you know, and shit like that, you know. So that's why he went and fought, you know, that's why he, like, you know, he wants to fight Andy Hiroka, you know, and shit like that. Because Hiroka, he doesn't even have a, out, like, because Hiroka, he doesn't have a belt, I don't think, you know. Andy Hiroka, he isn't even ranked. Like, literally, like, I don't even see him on the rankings, you know, and shit like that. Maybe inactivity, you know, and shit like that. Let me go look. Activity like a motherfucker, you know, and shit like that. That boy hasn't fought in damn near a year, you know, and shit. And that's going to be something that's going to be kind of something where it's going to also favor Brian Norman. So, honestly, though, like, he, like, it's been, like, no wonder I haven't heard of Andy Hiroka in a minute and shit like that, you know? And Jerron Ennis, Brian Norman, he literally came up in the game in the middle of that fucking inactivity. I mean, Andy Hiroka was fighting a little bit, but I mean, not even 3 fights in the middle of Brian Norman's reign. That is not good look for Andy Hiroka. So it's like he's gonna really have to have a tough ass training camp or something. I just don't know. Like, I feel like if Andy Hiroka doesn't take that fight, you know, it's probably because he's not ready, because he doesn't want to lose and shit like that, you know, right when he comes back. He wants to be able to have a fight where he could be, like, a couple fights where he could be able to stay active and shit like that. So I feel like, you know, if Hiroka doesn't agree to fight Brian Norman, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, he's gonna have to fight, he's gonna have to fight, you know, Jerron Ennis. But overall, it's hard for me to say that a Japanese fighter is not gonna take that fight, you know, because he's gonna take that fight, Andy Hiroka, you know, and shit like that, you know. But I'm just saying, though, just boy, oh boy, that's going to be something that's going to be a risk taker in that fight, though. It's shit like that, you know? Like, I just don't know, you know, it's shit like that, because it's just like, that boy, like, cause Brian Norman, that nigga can punch, bro. Like, literally, like, he could punch. Like, literally, like, I'm just saying, like, there's not many, I mean, there's fighters that can punch like that, but it just, in that level, I don't know about that, because he could do anything with that power, and it's just more of like, and he's so smart of how he knows when to put somebody's lights out. Like, I just, like, he's gonna do the same exact shit, I'm just saying, to Jin Sasaki, of what he did. I mean, like, he's gonna do the same exact shit to Hiroka what he did to Jin Sasaki, you know, and shit like that, you know, unless if Hiroka has some crazy ass training camp, you know, and shit like that, you know. I don't see that, man. And that's the thing, you know, and shit like that. I don't see that, you know, and shit like that, you know, but we'll see, though, you know, and shit like that. We'll definitely see. But I'm just saying, right now, probably what most people are probably going to pick, you know, and shit like that, is that they're going to pick, you know, Brian Norman. But I mean, overall, you know, Hiroka has power, but same for, you know, Jin Sasaki. You know, I mean, like, I really, like, both their powers are, I would say, the same. I would say that, you know, Hiroka's more of technique, and he more kind of, he could put your lights out more with one shot, you know, like, you know, Sasaki is more to hit you multiple times, you know, and shit like that, you know, and then his power will start accumulating then his power will start accumulating with all of his punches. You know, Hiroka doesn't need to do that. So, I mean, like, it could be definitely a different fight, you know, and shit like that, but no matter what, if you, like, Norman's gonna find a way to win, you know, and shit like that, you know, and I'm just saying, but we'll see, man. But I'm just saying, right now, it's just, like, off of that inactivity, like, Brian Norman's been staying active very well, you know, like, in the past 2 years, he's already fought, you know, like almost 4 times, you know, and shit like that, you know, or actually more than that, you know, and shit like that, you know, and that's the thing and shit like that, you know. So, like, I just don't know, man, you know, and shit like that, you know, but I would like to see it because Hiroka is a good fighter, and overall, regardless of win, lose, or draw, or getting knocked the F out, and shit like that, Hiroka is a damn good fighter, and we all know that, like, cause I seen him fight before, Hiroka, and shit like that, and he's a good fighter, and shit like that, but it's just more of like, I just don't know about going against Brian Norman, man. That he literally knocked out like a fellow Japanese fighter like that, man. Like, I'm just saying, like, I'm not trying to keep on bringing that up, but that was the biggest reason why I thought this was gonna be a good fight, and shit like that. Like, he literally made that shit just look so easy, Brian Norman. Like, literally, like, I'm just fucking saying, bro. But yeah, man. But overall, I feel like what would be a good fight, though, and shit like that, for Andy Hiroka's comeback fight before it, even wanting to fight somebody like Brian Norman, and shit like that, is fighting Karen Chukazian. I feel like Karen Chukazian would be a good fight, and shit like that. And it's a tough fight, too. It would definitely also get him ready, too, for, like, for more of the tougher opposition, and shit like that, But it would be a really, really tough fight. Overall, I do think that that Andy Hiroka would win on points, because overall, because I see the early to mid rounds, like ending in it being a tie, but then I see Hiroka taking the later rounds and shit like that, so I see him winning like 7-5 against Karen Chukazian in Japan, and shit like that, so like, yeah, and shit like that. So it's gonna be a good fight, and shit like that with him. With like, it would be a good fight with him and Karen Chukazian. Something like that, and shit like that. Get you out off the couch, and wrap your hands up, or get yourself in a training camp, wrap your hands up, and then look good against Karen Chukazian, or even beat Karen Chukazian. If you beat Karen Chukazian, that's still gonna put your name up there, and shit like that, because Jaron Ennis struggled against Karen Chukazian, and he's a pretty damn good fighter. Andy Hiroka is a pretty damn good fighter too, so regardless, I'm like, Karen Chukazian, it shows, like, regardless, like, like, if you're gonna give Andy Hiroka a test like that, like, you're gonna have to be somewhat of a good fighter, or like, or just, a good ass fighter. And overall, Karen Chukazian is a pretty good fighter, and shit like that, so it's like, I feel like that would be a good fight for Hiroka, and shit like that, I'm not Ennis, not Norman yet, because Norman, I really want to see him fight Ennis, man. That's why I want to see him fight Ennis. Like, you can't just knock out Jin Sasaki like that and just ask for, for Hiroka to hop off the couch and fight you, and shit like that, like, literally, and shit like that, it's like, I'm just saying, and shit like that, like, that's not how it works. Like, you literally, like, been calling out Jaron Ennis for so long. Like, bro, like, you've been calling this dude out for so fucking long, and shit like that. How in the hell are you just gonna go and you basically ducked Jaron Ennis, bro. Sorry if I'm drilling my niggas, but I'm just saying, like, literally, but like, you've been ducking Jaron Ennis for this fucking long, bro. Like, literally, for this long, you've been ducking Jaron Ennis. Like, literally, bro. Like, I'm not saying for this long, but now you want to duck him? I'm just saying, now you want to duck Jaron Ennis? Like, bro, now you want to fucking duck Jaron Ennis. Like, you can't just go after Hiroka like that. You got to get, like, at that time, at this point, you got to respect Tony, like Andy Hiroka's record, that he's 24-0 with 19 knockouts, and what he's done for Japan, and shit like that, like, literally, you can't just bully him like that, bro. Like, literally, you can't just go and do that, bro. Like, literally, you go, like, get your ass in there with Ennis, bro, before you want to go and call the shots like that, and shit like that. That's how I feel, and shit like that, like, it's good that he's a money man, but I feel like he's a little too early on trying to call the shots, and I feel like you ducked Ennis, bro. If you don't fight Ennis, I'm just saying you ducked Ennis, and shit like that, because Ennis is fine right now. He didn't even get a scratch in that fight against Stanionis, and he's already training right now, and doesn't even, and not even budging, and shit like that, like, literally, he's ready for any fucking opportunity right now, and especially for you, Norman. He's ready for you, and shit like that. He's been waiting for you, and shit like that. He's also been calling you out too, and shit like that. that. After that Stanionis fight, he also called you out too. So, you know, like, I believe so, you know, and shit like that, you know. But I'm just saying, like, literally and shit like that. Like this fight needs to happen. Hiroka, Karen Chugazian, or anybody else that's a good that's top in that division. You know, for Hiroka, because Hiroka would be in the top 5 or probably a mandatory. You know, and shit like that. You know, or a champion. You know, and shit like that, because he was a champion before. You know, and shit like that. You know, and then inactivity or whatever. But either way, like, you know, he's in that level and shit like that. You know, so he could fight Chugazian, all these fighters, but Brian Norman, Ennis, that needs to happen. Ennis, Norman, that needs to fucking happen, bro. Stylistically, that's what needs to happen. Both these fighters are talented as hell. Both these fighters have a lot of power. Like, there shouldn't be no ducking, bro. Like, literally, after you just go to Japan and knock out Jensen Sasaki, like, come on, bro. Like, please don't go and do that ducking type of shit. Like, because when people like to play that ducking shit, like, they don't fight, like, they don't fight, like, they had this shit waiting for, like, like a year to, like, 3 years and shit like that. You know, and shit like that. Almost like Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury. You know, and shit like that. That shit took forever until that shit happened. You know, and shit like that. You know, like, literally. Like, they've been wanting to fight each other for a long ass time, you know, and shit like that, you know, but then they fought each other and shit like that, you know. But I'm just saying though, and shit like that, like, they're like there shouldn't be no ducking. But with that fight, I don't think there was any ducking though and shit like that. If it was ducking, I think Wilder was probably ducking Tyson Fury a little bit, you know. Like, I'm like, and I'm a fan of Wilder, but I would like, or it was the other way around, you know, and shit like that, you know. Like, I don't really know, because Wilder, like, that boy, like, that right hand was fucking, like, was scary, you know, and shit like that. Like not like, I never seen somebody just simply knock somebody out just confidently with that many wins with just a simple but anyways and shit like that, you know. I'm just saying and shit, you know. This is about Brian Norman and his win against Jensen Sasaki. I already went over that shit, knocked his ass out, you know, and shit like that, put him on the stretcher, prayers up to Jensen Sasaki, you know, and shit like that, you know. But it's just more of like, you know, and Jensen Sasaki still proved that he's a good fighter, but at the end of the day, you can't just go like, you know, just go and call out Andy Hiroka like that, you know, and shit like that. Like, literally, like, Hiroka, like, cause knowing Hiroka, he's gonna take any opportunity. He, like, if you keep on calling his name out and if there's that opportunity, he's going to take that opportunity and shit like that, you know. And that's the thing and shit like that, you know. But like, you know, that's the thing and shit like that, you know. I really feel like Norman's playing that bully game. But yeah, man, you know, and shit like that, you know. But overall, this is what I think. Do I think he's gonna fight Eddie Hiroka next? Sadly, yeah, bro. I like it, like, honestly, like, you like unless that doesn't happen, but at the same time, I do see where they randomly make the Ennis versus Norman fight, but I just don't know why the fuck that fight can't happen. Like, that, like, Eddie Hearn got the money to make that fight, you know, and shit like that, you know. Jaron Ennis, you know, he's a good fighter. Like, just that fight needs to fucking happen. Make a pay-per-view. I don't care. I'm probably pretty certain that they're probably gonna make it somewhat well, I don't know though. You know, and shit like that, you know. That'd be cool, though, if they made a pay-per-view, but, I mean, I don't think they would, you know, but I don't know, though, and shit like that, because they're both popular fighters and shit like that. Or, I want to say, Jerron is more of a name fighter, though. Like, I don't think a whole lot of people know about, like, Norman yet, besides his fan base, you know, and besides true boxing fans, you know, and shit like that, you know. But once he actually gets himself into the big stage like that, you know, and shit like that, you know, like, that's the thing, you know, because sometimes, like, you know, top rank fights be ignored and shit like that, you know. But it's just more of like, that's the thing and shit like that, you know. But yeah, man, and shit like that, you know. But that's my opinion and shit like that, you know, of everything. And yeah, man, you know, and shit like that, you know. But make sure you guys like and subscribe. I'm Preston. Peace out, man.